In the East Midlands, Jeremy Corbyn stays, but what does it mean for politics here?
The Labour Party conference officially underway today then, but has anything been resolved by Jeremy Corbyn's re-election as Labour leader?
We'll also be hearing from one Labour councillor who resigned from the party overnight.
And these little piggies definitely will be going to market, but what kind of price will they get? The UK pig industry has been enjoying a post-Brexit boom, but what does the long-term future hold for the industry?
Hello, I'm Mari Ashby, and on another momentous day for politics, my guests are ready with their analysis of what it means for us here in the East Midlands. Alberto Costa is the Conservative MP for South Leicestershire, and Margot Parker is a UKIP MEP for the East Midlands. Welcome to you both. So, as we know, Jeremy Corbyn has been re-elected as Labour leader. Alberto Costa, in public, your party is celebrating, but there are clearly, as has been mentioned in some of the papers today, some divisions still in your own party. The reports this morning that David Cameron was furious with Theresa May for not helping enough during the referendum campaign.
Well, my party isn't celebrating at all. I think it's important to have a strong and effective opposition in the House of Commons, and I say that as a Conservative and a loyal Conservative member of the House of Commons, but it is important for the whole nation that we have a strong and effective opposition, and I'm afraid that Jeremy Corbyn is not that, which is why one of the Leicestershire County Councillors appears to have resigned in recognition that Jeremy Corbyn is not a strong and effective member of the
Well, we'll let him talk
opposition.
for himself in a moment when he joins us. But Margot Parker, UKIP has been keen to attract Labour voters in the East Midlands. Does Corbyn's re-election now open the door for that to happen here in the East Midlands?
Yes, the door's always been open. I mean, we've always attracted...
Is it more open?
Yes. Yes, I mean, he's had his coronation. This has been a painful year for the Labour Party, and I think a lot of old Labour voters are quite sad because they say, look, we didn't leave the Labour Party left us. So they were looking for somewhere else to be, and fortunately they've come to UKIP, and that's great.
We'll talk more about UKIP's plans later. That's the view here in the studio. But what do our Labour politicians make of it all? They're all gathered, as you know, in Liverpool for the party's conference. Our political editor Tony Roe is there too, and he's been getting reaction.
Yes, the Labour Party conference underway officially today. I was here yesterday, though, when the main business, of course, was the re-election of Jeremy Corbyn. And after that announcement, I caught up with some East Midlands Labour delegates at the conference. Among them was a 24-year-old dental nurse called Diane James. She's from Hucknall. She backed Jeremy Corbyn. Now, she says she has a message for those MPs who rebelled against him.
We all lived through the Blair years that we didn't necessarily agree with, but we went with it just because it was what our party wanted, and he was, you know, the elected leader and then the elected Prime Minister. So I think in terms of uniting the party, they need to be the ones that unite the party.
What must it be like for a Labour councillor at the moment, trying to get your message across on the doorstep to people? Well, I spoke to one councillor from Ashfield who was here yesterday. Nicole Niduweni says she's found it rather difficult.
To be honest, if I am frank, it's chaos, which is why today is really important and this conference is really important and today's results really important. It's time to just unite, essentially. A lot of people on the doorstep aren't feeling confident, and we need to bring back the confidence in the people to get the results that we need to get us back into government.
With me now is John Ashworth, Labour Shadow Cabinet Member, MP for Leicester South and member of the National Executive. John, does Jeremy Corbyn's re-election as leader solve anything?
Well, Jeremy has been re-elected. The Labour Party has to unite around that. We've got to understand now that we've got big elections next year across the East Midlands, county council elections across Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire and Leicestershire and elsewhere too. We have to win. We have to hold on to Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. We've got to, I'd love us to win Leicestershire. It's obviously difficult, but we've got to definitely hold on to what we've got and gain seats off the Tories and Liberals. So we've got a lot of hard work to do, and that's our focus now.
You've already lost one seat in Leicestershire, in effect, with the resignation of Councillor Leon Spence. What do you say to him?
Well, I think it's sad, it's disappointing. Leon works really hard for his community, and I just want to say to people, you know, your enemy isn't Jeremy Corbyn, and your enemy isn't Labour MPs who have said they didn't support Jeremy Corbyn. You know, your enemy is the Tory party, or the UKIP party, or the Liberal party, and we've got to be focusing on them And most importantly, we've got to be listening to the people and responding to people's needs and convincing them that we have practical answers to the problems they face, and getting there, and then getting the confidence of them in the elections next year.
Because we have heard from local councillors that it's been extremely difficult for them on the doorstep because people, all they hear is Labour divided.
Yeah, I mean, divided parties don't win elections, but that also means that everybody in the Labour Party's perhaps got to calm down a bit. I mean, all this stuff about, let's deselect the MPs, I mean, that's just unhelpful rubbish. We've got to end all that. All this stuff we see on Twitter, all this sort of people shouting and bawling at one another on Twitter and Facebook, that's got to come to an end. Because what is the most important thing for people involved in politics? It's representing the people. And we've got to listen to what the people want, and we've got to respond to the people's needs. So that's what we've got to start doing now. Let's leave all the internal ructions that we've had, and let's start responding to people, and let's convince them that we've got a good practical answers to their problems in next year's county council elections.
John Ashworth, thank you very much indeed. The conference does resume again this afternoon, and they'll be talking about issues maybe other than the leadership election, and they'll be discussing local government, the environment and energy. But I think we'll be hearing more of the leadership in the next few days.
Undoubtedly. Well, Tony Roe reporting there from Liverpool, and joining us now is Councillor Leon Spence, who resigned from the Labour Party just last night. Councillor Spence, we heard John Ashworth in our film from Liverpool there calling for unity. How is your resignation going to help any of that?
I think the situation that we've got at the moment is that Jeremy has been able to go through this process of gaining support from members twice. And each time that democratic support is there. And to be honest, it's important at this stage that he gets that opportunity to put his agenda to the public. At the same time, if you don't agree with him, I think it's absolutely wrong to sit and gripe and backstab in private or even in public. You're far better to step outside of the party.
Won you over as time goes on?
I don't think he's actually speaking to members of my community. I don't think the policies that he's putting forward, policies about nationalisation of rail, his situation on defence, is really something that is speaking to members of my community in Whitwick and Thringston.
But rail nationalisation is very popular as a policy.
It's a policy which we're told is popular. The problem is, when you see a list of policies, just how important is it to people? Lots of things are popular, but how important is it to change people's views?
It's interesting, though, that John Ashworth was saying, obviously, he's disappointed that you have resigned. Some East Midlands MPs do share your reservations that you've just mentioned about Jeremy Corbyn, but responding to people's needs is what John Ashworth says needs to be done now, and you're not doing that because you're leaving.
Yeah, I think actually one of the fundamental things I disagree with John about, and John's a great guy, is he talks about our enemies are the Tories, our enemies are the Lib Dems. And actually we shouldn't have enemies. What we should have are opponents, and we should be concentrating on putting our agenda forward. And actually, I think we fail at that as a party. I think, to be fair, other parties do that as well. We should all be concentrating on what makes Britain best. Yeah. And actually, that's the biggest failing of the Labour Party at the minute.
There hasn't been a wave of resignations so far on this, but the mood of the conference, as we've heard, is one of uniting. And a united opposition, Alberto Costa, is something that will cause you problems.
Well, can I just pay tribute actually to Councillor Leon Spence? I think he's done a very brave thing. He's he was a member of the Labour Party, a party which he's voted for all his adult life, and he's looked at it very carefully and said, this is not a party of governance. It's not a party that can reflect the wishes of the majority of the British electorate. And this is where I think
but look
that
at all
we have
the
a
new
one-nation
members.
Conservative
look at all the new
government.
members the party's got now, though.
Well, actually,
having
a lot of members is one thing, but it's the British electorate.
You wish you had all of those new members in your party.
What's more important is that any party of governance governs on behalf of the majority of the British electorate. And that's why I'm a strong supporter of Theresa May. When she went to Downing Street, she made very clear, Marie, that she was representing one nation Conservative government. She represents people across the political spectrum, and that's why I think she's going to be one of the most effective Prime Ministers, particularly in these challenging Brexit times.
Sorry, Leo.
I think the point is very important, that Britain needs two things. It needs an effective opposition, but it also needs to have an opposition that is a government in waiting. Now, I would be more than happy to get behind a Labour Party that is an effective opposition. The difficulty is I can't see with Jeremy's policies that we are a government in waiting.
Is UKIP the government in waiting, Margot?
Most certainly. I mean, we're number 3. We're sitting there waiting as the opposition in waiting. We will always bring the inconvenient facts to the British people because we do believe in putting the British people first. That's where we stand, always have.
You have a new leader. Your new leader is going to need to take some time to establish herself after years of Nigel Farage. Maybe Jeremy Corbyn just needs more time.
Well, I think he's had a year already. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of infighting. And I mean, I think anti-Semitism is a frightening thing. I hate to see people threatened and abused. I think that's completely wrong and very unacceptable in politics today. And I also pay tribute because I think you've done a very brave thing and you put the people first. Well done, you.
Well, has he? But what are you going to do now? Are you going to resign as a councillor? You also had an important role in children and family services. You say it's very brave that he's done
come
this,
and
but
join UKIP.
How are you going to
be very brave?
How are you going to help those people in your community?
I take the point. I think where we are in the county council term at this stage, the term comes to an end next May. If I was to stand down now, it would be very unlikely that there would be a by-election given the time and the regulations. So you're going to remain as a councillor? So I'll remain as an independent councillor. I've got no intentions to stand again, but I'll remain as an independent councillor until the end of the term. The sad thing for me is the children and families work. The work that in leading the committee in Leicestershire we've done across party. We've managed for the past 3.5 years to put politics completely to one side and done some really vital work there.
That's great.
Leon Spence, thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio. Well, so much for Labour, but does Jeremy Corbyn's re-election open up a gap for UKIP in the Labour heartlands here in the East Midlands? The party has just elected a new leader. Diane James has our region very firmly in her sights, and she's a strong opponent of one major policy which will affect us here, HS2.
I've been absolutely dismayed, for instance, that I can't get to the East Midlands particularly easily. Stamford, for instance, and Grantham, just trying to drive there, an absolute nightmare. The fact that the HS2 is such a white elephant, it's over budget, it's recently lost its chief executive, it's quite frankly off the rails. It's as simple as that. So anything that can be done to take the money that's been allocated to that project and invest it in other areas where there are transport problems, transport infrastructure issues, that's what I would wish to support.
Well, it's great to see that Diane James has actually heard of Grantham and, of course, the East Midlands, Margot, but a lot of people here in the East Midlands are in favour of HS2, and her strong views on abandoning it could be a vote loser here in the East Midlands.
I don't think so. I think it's about using the money in a very sensible way. It's a huge sum of money. It's very much a vanity project. Let's be absolutely clear about that. It really is. So you can put that money into other projects which will be more beneficial for the East Midlands. We want to see more manufacturing. Yes, of course you can sort out, and you need to do things about our transportation. But
you do, but the business community welcome HS2 for obvious reasons. Those links are crucial.
Yes, indeed. But we've seen often when people then transport themselves to London to do and to work rather than actually concentrating on the area that the service provides. So I think it's a huge amount of money which can be better spent. I have no doubt about that whatsoever.
This is your party's big project, £2 billion spent already. Maybe it's time to cut your losses and basically say, spend the money elsewhere where it's better needed.
Well, as a lawyer, I frequently use the East Coast Line and the West Coast Line, and I can tell you the system is creaking. These are Victorian infrastructure which we currently use to maintain their commercial abilities. HS2 is being looked at again. Certainly Theresa May is having a careful thought on it, but I'm supportive of investing in Britain's needs.
Sure.
Margot mentioned it as being a vanity project. I wouldn't use words like that. I would say that as a Member of Parliament, I have to look at the evidence and I have to ask myself, is this something that's going to benefit primarily the nation as well as the region? And I think presently from the evidence that I've seen, it does. But of course we'll be discussing it more fully in the House of Commons.
Sure.
So what is UKIP going to do in the East Midlands then, apart from abandoning the HS2 project if you had your way?
If we had our way, absolutely. It's much more important to improve the networks that you've got already. I mean, clearly, you know, I get on a...
But how do you do that?
Well, let me just... Well, fine. Let me just tell you. When I get on in Kettering, and if I'm on a certain train with East Midlands trains, you've got to move down to get off because the platforms are short. Well, I'm not a rail expert, but I would suggest you can lengthen those platforms. That would be a bit of a start going on there.
Okay.
Secondly, I think, you know, our roads, it's very important that our roads function well. We need to do that. And the other thing, of course, is to encourage manufacturing, good apprenticeship. So there's lots of things with education.
How much are you prepared to spend on all of those things?
Well,
on
that's
roads?
not costed, but our manifesto last year for the general election was very well costed and actually received no criticism whatsoever. So we have to build on that manifesto, sure.
I agree with everything you said. I think we can lengthen platforms.
Yeah.
I think we should be improving road
Yeah.
infrastructure, which is
Yeah.
what we're doing in
Yeah.
my constituency
Yeah.
in South Leicestershire
Sure.
with the Catthorpe Junction.
Yep.
But we need much more than that.
Of course we do.
This is the 5th largest economy in the world.
We
need
know.
to transport
We
not
do.
just people, but goods as well.
We absolutely
and
do.
HS2 is about Britain's future needs. So let's look at that
So why
evidence
is
and
it
let's
still not
debate it
happening?
and-
Why is it taking so long?
Because
if you
this
say
is
so?
very
this is
expensive.
a big proposal, and it is an
Huge.
expensive proposal. We need to make sure we do the right thing. We've got a new Prime Minister, and it's right that the new Prime Minister is taking her time to carefully look at Britain's future needs, particularly in light of Brexit.
And in the time, that bill goes up and up and up.
Well, we've just had the EU referendum result. This is a big issue for Britain,
It
and we
is.
need to carefully analyse this to see what we need for Britain's future needs.
Okay. Well, now, the pig industry has been struggling with low prices, with hundreds of farmers going out of business, but the weak pound has given it a surprise Brexit boost. But what happens next, and will pig farmers get left behind in the negotiations to leave the EU? Rob Pittam reports.
These little characters, currently taking lumps out of my wellies and out of my biological suit, are very pampered pigs. The fact that they're running around on a deep straw bed is a sign of very high welfare standards, the highest in the world according to the UK pig industry. But with high standards comes high costs, and that's a worry in a post-Brexit economy. Britain introduced its own strict standards 20 years ago, but pig farmers have paid a high price, raising production costs and making it difficult to compete. The industry has halved in size.
We have production systems in that other countries don't have. You know, you won't see straw like this or sows on straw in any other countries in the world. Be aware that they'll have a nibble at you.
David Owers has been a pig farmer in Lincolnshire for 30 years and seen his industry decline. Brexit, though, has brought a surprise boost.
2 years ago, prices were pretty good, really. Then in the last couple of years, it's gradually come down. And then Brexit came along, and really, in the short term, has been a great benefit to us because it's made imports more expensive and it's enabled us to export pigs to China. And prices are starting to move up now, thankfully.
But there are long-term worries. Inside the EU, Britain's pig farmers are protected by high tariff barriers, which make it costly for other countries to sell into the European Union. If they're removed, it could open the doors to a flood of low-cost and low-welfare imports.
The big worry is how the government negotiate the tariffs, really, and do they have free trade with a lot of countries? If they had free trade with Brazil, South America, Canada, you'd wipe the British pig industry out overnight, because at the moment there's a 45p a kilogram tariff on pig meat import into the EU. If that went, then we'd be open to really low welfare from the rest of the world.
Pig farmers see Brexit as a chance to renew their industry. They're looking for government help to bring in new technology and update their buildings. But they also worry that lowering tariffs could see it wiped out completely. For pig farmers, Brexit comes with exciting opportunities and worrying threats.
Hope that's not put anyone off their Sunday roast this lunchtime. Alberto Costa, pig farmers and farmers in general are worried that there'll be a low priority for the UK when we begin those Brexit negotiations. They're real worries.
I've just come back from Rome where I've been discussing Brexit with the Italian Parliament, the Vice President of the Senate and the Vice President of their equivalent House of Commons, the Chamber of Deputies. And I can tell you that we are ensuring as a Conservative Party that Britain's best interests are met. We want to continue exporting the very best of British produce, and that includes pork. And I can tell you that in European countries such as Italy, British pork is purchased quite heavily. So, you know, Brexit is a challenge, but as Theresa May has repeatedly and rightly said, we will get through this challenge. We will make best use of the opportunities which arise. And for the farming industry, I'm pleased to confirm as part of the Conservative governing party that we will match EU spending up to 2020. This is a promise that the Conservative government have made for farmers.
OK, well, some critics, Margot, argue that the conditions that we saw in our film there aren't necessarily the best way to keep pigs, but welfare standards here are actually higher than other countries in the EU. Your party, though, was arguing that it was Brussels red tape that was adding to the cost to business. But in this case, it's actually the UK government.
Well, yes. I mean, I think, and I'm glad to hear you speak about sort of food is so important. It's a critical industry. And absolutely, by guaranteeing money in that critical industry has to be sacrosanct. I mean, we have excellent farmers who do a fantastic job, whether it's milk production, whether it's beef, it's poultry and pigs. We do a great job, and we do export. We need to export elsewhere.
Of course. I mean,
throughout
as you say,
the
it's
world.
a vital industry.
Absolutely.
But why should we be protecting farmers in our EU negotiations when there are other industries, manufacturing, for example, the service sector that really needs help?
But yes, they all need help. But food production is critical. It is a no-brainer. I've always thought that. I mean, we put a huge amount in a subsidy into the EU. We have that money available to take care of British farmers and to do the right thing for them. And we will do that.
I mean, you've made some reassurances today, Alberto Costa, but how can we be sure that those are going to happen? Because it seems so long away yet until we actually come out of the EU. So nice to hear those reassurances, but will they really come off in the end?
Well, look,
they have to.
We've just had the EU referendum result. We've just had a big change in government, and the government has been very clear that it will continue to protect all British industry from the subsidies that it received originally from the EU up until the next election. Once we pull out of the EU, it will be for the British government, and I hope it will be a Conservative government post-2020, that will ensure that those industries which have been reliant on subsidies from the EU will continue to benefit from the opportunities available in the new Britain.
Thanks on that. Well, let's catch up now with some more of the region's political stories. Here's Rob with 60 seconds.
A ban on riding bikes in Mansfield town centre is being challenged in the High Court. Cyclists have to dismount in the pedestrianised area around the market square and the streets leading up to it.
Why would you want to walk with it when the marketplace is empty or the streets are empty? On market days, if it's busy, yes, you get off and walk with your bicycle and it's not an issue.
Mansfield District Council says it can't comment on the case pending the judicial review. A Leicester City councillor is recovering after being badly beaten by two men when he went to the aid of a woman who was being threatened. Conservative Ross Grant suffered cuts and bruises to the face. Lincolnshire Police will be the first force in the country to advertise internationally for a new Chief Constable. The role will be open to candidates from the USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Fines for taking children out of school in Derbyshire have been dropped, for most parents at least. The County Council says only severe cases will be fined in future.
And that's where we leave it here in the East Midlands. Thanks to Margot Parker and Alberto Costa. Now back to Andrew Neil in Liverpool.